East and West, bringing communication, culture, and confidence. In this education section, we will address the following questions. For many people in Asia, English is not their first language, yet it is the global language of business. Is it possible to communicate effectively even if you are not 100% fluent in English? How does culture affect workplace communication? What has been the biggest change you have seen when it comes to workplace communication since the pandemic? Our guest speaker today is Miss Farida. She is an international speaker, trainer, and coach who specializes in communication mastery. She is an American graduate with 25-year corporate career that spanned careers in journalism, public relations, publishing, national branding, and content development. Over the last 10 years, she has trained people from over 50 countries spanning Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. She coaches leaders to be more precise, concise, and purposeful in how they connect and engage with their teams and customers. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube with the name Faridah Hameed. Hello, Miss Farida. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, and good morning, everyone in Vietnam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very good. So the first question that we would like to address is a lot of my audience is young people who are their first job in a multinational here in Vietnam. As someone who lived and studied in the US and has now trained people from so many countries, what is your number one difference you see communication styles between the East and the West?
Yeah, the experience that I've had from the time that I studied in the US to all the work that I've been doing with clients from all over the world, there's one thing that really stands out to me, Anne, and that is this thing called the power distance. I don't know if you've heard of it. There is something called a power distance index, which actually measures the hierarchy within different cultures and different societies. And Asian countries or Eastern societies are usually the ones that are the highest in that index. And being a high is not good because what it means is that if you have a high power distance, what it means that you are more reluctant to speak out. The culture within the organization is more formal, and therefore when it comes to the workplace that does become a problem because you know how in the East or in Asia we always talk about saving face. Yeah,
Sure.
it's something
Yeah.
very common in our cultures, right?
Mm,
And we do it because we think it is a sign of respect. And there is an element of that. The negative part of that is sometimes we overdo it and we don't question, we don't disagree, we don't say that can we do it a better way because the amount of respect or fear of someone who is of a more senior, someone who is more famous, or someone in government, or someone in regulation or the law is that we are very afraid to
mm,
say anything to them. So this
mm.
is the biggest difference because if you compare it to the West, and I'm sure you've had this experience as well, I'm sure
Yeah.
people listening, when you work in a Western kind of workplace or you have Western bosses, it's a lot more relaxed. You can call them by their first name. You can just go in and say, hi, how are you? And they'll come to your
Mm,
cubicle, they'll talk to you. Because I've worked with Americans and I've also worked with Australians. And I think for me, my
mm,
experience is it's a lot easier to talk to them that way. So this is the
mm,
biggest difference that I see.
I see. Can you share with us the reason behind those behaviors that you observed? Why? Mm,
Could you repeat that?
yeah. Can you share with us the reasons behind?
Okay, your line broke up a bit. Could you repeat it one more time?
Can you please share with us the reason behind those behaviors?
The reason behind those areas?
Those
The reason
behaviors.
those behaviors. Okay,
Mm,
because the reason is cultural. we are all brought up in the East or in Asia where we are very respectful of elders, and that's a good thing, right?
Mm,
We that is something we should be very proud of. Uh, so what happens is also when we go through the education system, when we go to school, the tendency is that we consume information, but we don't really have discussions. We don't
mm,
really question our lecturers. We don't have really strong debates. You will have people who are more outspoken. But what I'm talking about is generally because from a young age, the culture is that you don't talk back, you don't question, right? And so when you
yeah.
take that, let's say you go to school for about, 18 years, up to age 18, you're in school. And that's what you have learned all along. And then suddenly you go to the workplace and everybody says, oh, you have to speak up. It's very difficult. Behavior is the hardest thing to change. And so that
Mm,
is why I always say this is something that you have to practice. And the easiest way to start getting out of that is to learn to ask good questions, because
mm,
asking good questions is not you being rude, is not you disagreeing, but it's teaching you to start speaking up.
I see. Got you. And now let's come to the second question that we would like to address. For many people in Asia, English is not their first language, yet it is the global language of business. Is it possible to communicate effectively even if you are not 100% fluent in English?
What do you think?
I think so because practice makes perfect even though I was not born native English speaker, but I still can practice and can learn, so I believe that it is possible.
Absolutely. And you are the perfect example, right? You have learned and
Mm,
every day you practice. So even
yeah.
me, people listening to me say Farida is very fluent, but here's a secret. I read every day, I
Mm,
speak every day. I learn new words every day. So just
mm,
because you think someone is fluent doesn't mean they're an effective communicator. So I want to make that point to your audience.
mm,
Some people just like to talk a lot because they like the sound of their voice. And so when we
mm,
often talk about communication, people think it's verbal, it's the spoken communication. And that is a big part of it. But I'll come later to the point I want to make about writing as such an important part of communication as well. But coming back to your question, speaking well is about pronouncing your words clearly. It's also
mm,
about knowing the meaning of the words that you're using. What I find a lot with a lot of millennials, and I think with some Gen Z as well, is because we have so much of influence from American slang and American language that a lot of times people will use words without knowing what it means.
mm,
And I will tell your audience that, one of the easiest way to improve your English is whenever there is a word you don't understand, go to Google, type it in, and get the
mm,
meaning of the word so that you can use it properly. And you can also learn to pronounce it because on Google, they have a sound icon which you can click and it teaches you how to pronounce the word properly, right?
right.
So coming back to your point, just because someone is a fluent English speaker, it doesn't mean they're an effective communicator. As a trainer and a coach, I've attended many conferences where I've either been a speaker or I've been a participant. And I can tell you without any doubt that there are many people who cannot communicate well, even though they speak a lot. And so
Mm,
this is where the disconnect is. So when we want to be an effective communicator, don't forget that it also involves the full body. It's about your energy. In fact, energy is the number one secret of effective communication. Because
yeah.
before you even open your mouth,
Mm,
people can feel your energy. I'm sure you've had people where when you first meet them, you're like, I don't know if I like this person, right?
yeah.
We won't even say anything. We all have that. Maybe women more than men. Yes. But that tells you that everybody gives out an energy. And that
Mm.
is how people make the first impression about us, is what do they feel like in our presence. Okay, so that's very important. So once you start opening your mouth, effective communication means that you have to be clear about what it is you want to say. And the number two
Mm.
secret is keep it simple. Don't use big words.
Mm.
Big words do not impress
Mm.
anybody, right? And I think sometimes when people are not fluent, they feel if I use a big word, I will sound like I know the language better. But imagine if I
Mm.
come to Vietnam, I want to learn a bit of Vietnamese. I would learn the most common ways in which you speak, and I would keep it simple so that the person can understand what I'm saying. So my
Mm.
advice I'm teaching people from all over the world is don't be complicated, don't use big
Mm.
words, avoid words that are hard to pronounce. Because when
Mm.
you use big words that are hard to pronounce, you're going to fumble with those
Mm.
words. And so the best way really to improve your communication is to have a bigger vocabulary. And as I
Mm.
told you earlier, this is something that I do, but I want to share a story with you that I think will help
Sure,
your
sure.
audience. When I was a young journalist working in Malaysia, it was my first job. One day I was in a taxi going for
Mm.
an assignment, and the taxi was speaking very good English. And so I asked him, I said, how do you mind me asking how come you speak such good English? And he said, I could not afford to go and learn English, but I work in a multinational where my bosses are all Americans, Australians, British, and such. So every morning at breakfast, what he would do is he would buy a newspaper. Of course, those days, newspaper, social media did not
Wow.
exist. And then he would have a dictionary next to him, which was a Malay English because our national language is Malay.
Mm.
And he would read the Malay version and the English version, and any word that he did not understand, he would look up the meaning and he would learn how to
Mm.
pronounce it. And that's
Wow.
how he learned it. And he practiced it with all his
Mm.
bosses. So he spoke fluent English.
Awesome. He made a lot of effort on
Yes,
learning English.
yes.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, miss. So let me summarize your point. It means that you mean that the first key thing to be effective communicator is that don't use big word, and also use the word that you really mean, that you understand it, rather than using some words that you don't understand.
Yes, use accurate words.
Yeah.
Because the English vocabulary, there are many, many words you can use to
Mm.
describe certain. I'll give you another
Mm.
example. Let's say you want
Yeah.
to use the word angry. I'm feeling angry, right?
Mm.
There are so many other words to describe angry. It can be frustrated, it can be annoyed, it can be peeved, it can be sad, it can be I'm fearful. So many
Mm.
different words.
Mm.
And so, if you have a bigger vocabulary, it helps you be accurate, firstly, about the emotions that you are feeling,
Mm.
and also to tell the other person clearly what it is that you mean. Because if you
Mm.
go to somebody and they are angry with you, it may not be correct. Maybe you're just frustrated,
Yeah.
right? And those are two different words. It has different energy.
Mm.
Excuse me. So that's what I mean.
Okay.
Use accurate words.
Gotcha, accurate word. Now the next question is that how does culture affect workplace communication?
Yeah, culture plays a big role in workplace communication because there's two
Mm.
types of culture. One is national culture, and then there's workplace culture. And
Mm.
those two play into one another. So national culture, as I mentioned earlier, is about the power distance, and that is very common in the East. I will give you another example. When I was doing a training in the Middle East, this was a training with all women, and this was an international oil and gas company in the Middle East. And the ladies were telling me that they find it very hard to communicate effectively with men from the same country, but they find it so
Oh.
much easier to communicate with their bosses who are from the West because the power distance,
Mm.
the more relaxed way of communication made them feel like it was so much easier to bring up problems, to have discussions, to disagree, to ask for different points of view, whereas their own culture, they found it very difficult because there's a distance, about how you communicate, how you engage with one another. So that's national culture. So how does it affect workplace culture? It
Mm.
affects workplace culture in a couple of ways. Because
I see.
what is the culture in your workplace, for example, to your audience, right? Do you have a culture of openness or do you have a culture of silence?
Mm.
Do you have a culture of speaking up or not speaking up? Do you have a culture of diversity? Diversity not only of gender, but of opinions, of ideas.
Mm.
Is it a culture of conformity, for example, where everyone kind of does the same thing, says the same thing, doesn't do things that are different? Or is it a culture where there is diversity,
Mm.
right? So it comes into play in many, many ways. Oftentimes it's silent. But if there is no discussion about it, it can be it can be unconscious as well, because we
Mm.
watch what everybody else does and we say to ourselves, I don't want to be different. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to bring attention to me. But
Mm.
if you want to move up in your career, you want to work for international companies,
Mm.
you have to come up and speak up. Because
Yes.
what most of these big companies are looking for, they're looking for people with new ideas, with
Sure.
different points of view. So you
Mm.
do have to learn to communicate in a way that is respectful,
Mm.
but also that you find a way within your culture and context to be a bit more open. And I come back to this, learn to ask good questions, because
I
that
see.
will be the first step to help you.
That's pretty meaningful, Farida, because we understand that the national culture can affect the company's culture. And what has been the biggest change you have seen when it comes to workplace communication since the pandemic? What just has changed?
Yeah, the biggest thing I've noticed is everybody is of course on Zoom or StreamYard or whatever. So there a lot of people have been saying that they feel that they're losing out on the body language. That's
Sure.
one. But the biggest difference I've seen is a lot of people now have to do a lot of writing. So a
Mm.
lot of communication is via email, it's
Mm.
about proposals and things like that.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that most people's written communication is pretty bad.
Mm.
People are writing like robots. It's very
Mm.
formal, it's very stiff, because when you speak, you generally are a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah.
But somehow, when people are working in corporate jobs,
Mm.
they suddenly take on a different personality. And when they're sending off an email, they become very stiff, they become overly
Mm.
formal, and they love to use a lot of corporate buzzwords like I've made a list of some of them, right? Like,
Sure.
what is your personal vision of a future career? Right? When you can just say, what do you want to do in the next 2 years? You see the difference, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
some people say, we are planning this company event and we are targeting a maximum of 20 participants.
Mm.
Instead of just saying space for 20 people.
Mm.
So you can see the difference. The language is very formal, which does not work when you're trying to communicate with somebody.
Mm.
So
Mm.
people, one of the things that I teach, which is very popular with most of my clients, is how to write emails, how to do
Mm.
social media content without sounding so formal. You want to be relatable, you want to be professional, but you want to build relationships. You
Yeah.
cannot build relationships if your communication is very stiff.
Mm.
Just imagine if you're talking to a robot.
Mm.
That's how it's coming across in written communication.
Mm. Yeah, it lacks human character.
Yes. It
Mm.
is, it is a skill. I learned, I studied mass communication as a print journalist. So
Mm.
I will say it does require some training. It
Mm.
requires a lot of practice, but
Mm.
you can learn to write in a more human way. I always tell
Mm.
people, write like a human, don't write like a robot.
Yeah, I see. Otherwise, robot can do it for us.
Exactly, and you lose the human connection, you know.
Yeah, right. Sure. So the next question I would like to touch on is I'm sure that you know that even high achievers can struggle with confidence because we cannot maintain the high level of confidence all the time. What do you think why it happens and what is our solution for that?
What I have found is this, particularly for women, is
Yeah.
this idea of perfectionism.
Mm,
Excuse me, is perfectionism that women more than men, according to all the studies that have been done, tend to
mm,
be perfectionists. And it affects their self-confidence because when you want everything to be perfect, for example, let's say you're submitting a document or a proposal to your client, or you're submitting a proposal to your bosses, women will be so anxious about getting everything right, making sure there's, absolutely no spelling errors, that, everything is perfect, and then they get burned out. I know because
mm,
it happened to me. It happened to me. Is
oh,
that when you try so hard because you love your job, or you are
mm,
so you want people to think that you're really good at what you do, right? Which is a good
mm,
thing. But when you chase perfectionism, what you do is that you burn yourself out, and nobody is looking for perfectionism either.
mm,
And so
mm,
what happens is when you're not perfect, or your boss comes back to you and says, oh, this one you need to change, this one, doesn't seem right, or whatever, our self-confidence gets affected.
yeah.
So what I have learned over the years is that I have let go of my perfectionism. And my standard now is, I say to myself, if I'm 60, 70% done, it's done. The reason I do that is because I allow some flexibility for people to come back and give me their opinion about areas in which I can improve,
Mm,
areas that need to be changed, areas that need to be taken out. And that's okay,
mm,
because if you think your work is perfect, then it's very hard for you to also get feedback
mm,
about why some things may not be right. So my
mm,
advice to your audience I think is quite young, is that
yeah.
don't get into the bad habit of trying to be perfect all the time, because it's not
Mm,
going to work for you in the long term.
mm. Do you think that they also
Do you
have
think that
challenge imposter syndrome?
okay, you broke up a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Yeah. Do you think that they have the challenge of imposter syndrome?
Oh,
That's
absolutely. Yes.
mm,
Women have this problem with imposter syndrome. For
mm,
example, when applying for jobs, the data proves that when you see the job description, women will want to fulfill all the criteria of the job description before
mm,
they feel they are
mm,
qualified for the job. Men will look at it and say, if I have 6 of the 10, I'm
mm.
qualified.
I
Okay,
see.
so the imposter syndrome really affects women badly. And that
Mm,
also affects a lot of our self confidence, because when other people say things to us, we take it very personally. And we
mm,
always never think we're good enough.
I see.
And so that is why a lot of my clients who come to me are quite senior high achievers, because one of the things I work with them on is to get rid of that imposter syndrome, because
Mm,
that is the thing that's standing in the way of you moving up your career, getting more opportunities, to do more interesting work as well.
I see. Very useful information, Miss. Now let's come to the final question of our interview today. That is, what is your best advice you can give to our audience about how to improve their communication skills?
So, as I mentioned earlier, the number one advice I can give you is learn to ask good questions. And it doesn't have to be complicated questions. So,
Mm,
simple questions like, what is the one thing I can do better? Right? So,
mm,
let's say your boss gives you some feedback and you're not very happy or you're hurt. Put that aside, because you want to improve as a
mm,
communicator, as
mm,
an employee. So, ask them, what is the one thing I can do better? What are we trying to achieve with this project, for example? So try and use words like, what is the most important? What is the most urgent that we need to do? Because that helps you focus on the one thing that you need to focus on, which helps you in your communication, both written and spoken. Because
Mm,
this is the rule of life. Everybody is always very proud to say that they can do multitasking.
mm,
I completely
yeah.
disagree with it because
Mm,
multitasking is not possible. Because what we
mm,
do is we do something called context switching, which means that we stop this and then we start something else. It doesn't mean we can do everything.
yeah,
So
sure.
asking good questions helps us focus our
Mm,
attention, and
mm,
then we are also able to focus our work and our communication so that when we speak to people or we are writing an email or we're doing a proposal, we can communicate on that one thing, one big idea that we need to communicate on. So I would say learn to ask good questions.
yeah. Learn to ask good questions and also set the objectives before you communicate. That would be
Yeah.
the takeaway of Miss Farida. Miss Farida, thank you so much for joining us today. I do appreciate it so much for your time. And would you like to share your contact information with our viewers to encourage that they would like to contact you? How can they contact you?
Yeah, I'd love if any of you would like to reach out to me and contact me. So I'm active on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I'm Faridah Hameed. Faridah is
Mm,
spelled Faridah. Hameed is
mm,
spelled Hameed.
mm,
That is also my name on Instagram. You'll also find me on YouTube. I upload regular videos about leadership, about women, about communication on my YouTube
mm,
channel as well. So please come and join me and join the discussions that I have on all my social accounts. So
for
thank you
sure.
again, Anne, for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping to come to Vietnam hopefully next year.
Yeah, hopefully that we can travel abroad again next year and we can have a chance to see you. So, hi, our viewers. Tonight we're gonna have another stream with the topic branding your business, and we hope to see you at that time at 8 p.m. tonight. So, see you, everyone. Bye bye. Bye bye, Miss Farida.
Bye.